All right, we're live, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to let some people join in before we technically really get started, but we got another great version and exclusive episode of the Space Water podcast here today, everybody. We got Gary Wayne, the one and only Gary Wayne in the house from Genesis6Conspiracy.com. You guys can get both of his books in the Genesis 6 Conspiracy series. These are best-selling books. Gary is a Christian contrarian, a best-selling author, a really nice guy, and I'll tell you, he is a fountain of knowledge when it comes to biblical and other religions. I think it was Max Mueller that said, a man who knows only one religion knows none." And I think it's really special when people explore outside of the religion that they claim, and it gives more validity, or either, it either it denies or gives validity to your own beliefs and your own faith when you start to do this. And more times than not, it proves your faith in many cases. And I think it's really special when a man explores other religions and has knowledge of other religions as well. And that's where Gary comes in. And I really think it's special when we have him on. And I really appreciate the time he spends with us, everybody. We're sponsored by the mysticalspiralstore.com. And of course, you can find our guest today at Genesis6Conspiracy.com. We decided to talk about the parallels with Jesus Christ and Buddha and Krishna and various other deities out there, everybody. So this is going to be a really amazing show today. And before I hand it over to Gary, I wanted to just talk about one thing that we're going to get into today, and it has to do with Jesus. And there's a lot of differences between Jesus and other deities, but there also are many similarities. And we're going to discuss some of these similarities and differences. And also, there's a start part that I want to also start off with, Gary, that we could start with, was also with the death of Jesus and the darkness that happened at the crucifixion. And a lot of things are parallels in other religions that I don't think many people have explored before. So when we bring Gary on right now, we're gonna ask him about this, and we're gonna get way deeper into this. It's a very important topic, everybody. So buckle up. I'm glad to have you guys in the chat room. And once again, this is Gary Wayne from Genesis6Conspiracy.com. Gary, welcome back to the Space Water Podcast.
Well, thank you for inviting me back, and so happy to be here. And this is going to be an interesting topic. It could go a lot of different ways as more sort of doors, things kind of open. And what I would encourage people to do is to just sort of sit back and say, if we're going to have an end time, and I think we are, and I think we're in the fig tree generation, we need to be aware of all the things that are kind of cross-referenced in each of the belief systems and the cultures, because that's going to be brought back in this sort of new age of Atlantis as religions come back into a universal religion. And so those are there. And we're going to talk about some things that maybe a lot of people don't want to talk about. My sort of motivation for wanting to talk about it is to make people aware of the information
Yeah.
so that you can make your own decision and
I
that you
actually
can
avoided
just,
the topic with you for a while,
yeah.
for a reason.
And
I didn't want to piss
well,
anybody off, and I
yeah,
didn't want to offend you either.
yeah.
You
And
know?
so that when this starts to come together in the end time, people will be a little bit more prepared if they have an understanding of this to discern. At the end of the day, you're going to have to come down to a choice. And there's going to be clearly at least two choices there. There may be nuances to one of them, but we need to sort of understand that because this is going to be peer pressure and propaganda and all sorts of things on a scale we haven't seen before. So we have to sort of understand what's being talked about because even from a Christian perspective, even the elect will be deceived if that were possible. So then so if you're from a monotheist side versus the polytheist side, as a monotheist, we better recognize patterns of how they do those types of things because they're going to try and convince you that their position is legitimate, and they're going to present some very strong connections and evidence that will probably be mixed in, and this is my biases coming out, but evidence that's been manufactured.
Yeah, well, it was a struggle for me for years with certain things, and I kind of I don't know if I rationalized it in my head or made more sense of it. But clearly there are comparisons and differences, right? But then some of the comparisons are hard to deny, and they clearly existed way before Christianity, right? So I kind of assume that and maybe believe that those that are cut from the divine cloth or even royal bloodlines, they come in a certain way to this planet. So there's gonna be similarities.
Oh, absolutely. There's going to be similarities. Not, it would be unwise to suggest that everything in polytheism is a lie. Um, it's that would be a very poor position to take.
Yeah.
And then that will permit you to be easily discredited. But there's an interpretation that comes in on things that people are going to have to discern what their interpretation is, and that there's going to be a lot of commonalities. So when we look at just from a polytheist perspective, that their belief on the macro level and then what we see visibly at the micro level is this perpetual war between good and evil of two equal beings of the same kind of nature as they would describe them. So, how do I get there in terms of why they describe them as the same? Well, let's use the Gnostic understanding of Sophia, who creates the 12 archons, that in their belief system, the God of the Bible is part of those 12 archons, as is Satan. So they would be equal in that understanding and that sort of structure, but at perpetual odds and of the same making and the same being. Different interpretation than what a Christian would have, where God would be the one who uses Jesus as the Word of God to create all of these beings. Your frame is frozen up, Ra, so I'm not sure whether or not we're still on, or maybe you should jump in and let me know whether or not you're still there.
Hear me? Can you hear?
I'm hearing you now. It's broken, but your
Oh man, maybe
picture is
the yeah,
frozen.
it does say the internet was going wonky.
Okay.
Can you see me now?
I can see you, but it's still frozen.
I hope I'm not making a horrible face.
No, you weren't. So you moved, but it's still frozen. So it's
All right,
starting to animate.
let me see if I shut off one of my screens. Is that better?
Yep, that's much better. So
All right.
yeah, so we should understand that even the foundations of polytheism creates a beginning that monotheism comes from. And in the visible physical world, they're going to look at monotheism created with Moses, who was a polytheist initially, and that wasn't the original religion that Moses brought to Israel, that it went rogue in the time of the kings. So that's the position of the polytheists. But understand, they're saying that monotheism is a rogue version of polytheism, and their goal will be to bring that rogue version of monotheism back into polytheism in the end time. So if you have all of these historical roots from the beginning, expect a whole bunch of things in between that are going to be similar because they're creating similar hierarchies. They have similar visions of how history was to be played out, as an identical end time, except for the outcome and except for who they believe are good and evil, just as who we believe are good and evil as monotheists is different than what they believe. It's the polar opposite, so to speak. So we should be looking for similar things. So if they're looking for their dragon messiah to come to take us into a new age, we shouldn't be surprised about that, right? And that if you look at that word antichrist, part of the meaning is to come before Christ. So we should be looking for that as evidence for ourselves that if they have a Messiah that is going to come before Jesus in the end time, that they would have something like that before Jesus in prehistory at some point in time, that their version would come before Jesus, because nothing new is under the sun. What was will be again. Both belief systems have that as common linkage as well. So they have a council of the gods. God has a council of gods. They have scripture. We have scripture. We have in our belief system the Holy Spirit. They utilize the Mother Goddess, the Queen of Heaven, for that, and Sophia would be sort of the greatest sort of those Queen of Heavens in the Gnostic version, but similar beings in other pantheons. So we should expect, as I say, that crossover. And so the trick gets to be is to A, understand it, B, try and discern it for yourself.
No, I'm in what you're saying. It's is really, I think, hard for Christians because they want to believe that there could be no comparison to Christ.
Yeah. This,
And
and I wish that were the case. But if you're trying to convert everybody in the world, you're going to have to deal with that from a polytheist perspective. So the best way to do that is to create a similar situation that people would say, well, enough of that lines up with me to probably be the true Messiah. You're still freezing up and breaking up.
I lost it for a second. You back? Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
All right. Yep. Some
So with that sort of being said, maybe it's time for you to sort of maybe lay some of the things down um, about Krishna and Buddha, and then we can sort of talk about those things.
yeah. In the birth, my
You're breaking up still.
my connection stuff. It's unstable.
Well, do you want to go back out and come back in? Or does that break up your live stream?
Better. You can't. Yeah, I think it's now. I don't know. Everything's going in, but I good now, right?
You're still breaking up.
Oh no.
That was a little better there.
Yeah. Should I back out and come back in?
If you can, sometimes just
Yeah.
making that reconnection makes all the difference. If it was a bad connection, it would probably be at both ends. So, I mean, a bad link, I mean. So I don't know whether people are still out there. I'll just sort of fill some empty air until Ra comes back. So yeah, we're going to be talking about some interesting connections here, and not that we're trying to do anything from a blasphemous sort of perspective,
Yeah.
but I think when by the end of the show, people are going to be able to walk away with a clear understanding of who Buddha was, who Krishna was, and who Jesus is.
Yeah.
And they may be for each of the belief systems playing, the same role, but they're distinct beings. And there's actually a stream that we'll be able to connect in there from the polytheist side that'll help you better understand things in terms of how that system works with their Messiah-like figures.
Yeah. Can you hear me clear and see me clear now?
Much better,
All right, cool.
way better.
The well, when it comes to the physical description of them, Gary, there's clear differences. I mean, when you look into Buddha's difference, I mean, they talked about his sexual organ was sheathed. It was like inside. He
Yep.
had webbed feet, things like this. So clearly different physical descriptions than Jesus. But there's things that you can't deny that are similar that it's just too much of a coincidence that need to be discussed. Like from the jump, Buddha was born of the virgin Maya, who conceived him without sexual or carnal intercourse. And Jesus was born of the Virgin Mary without carnal intercourse. And Maya is another name for Mary. That goes right hand in hand. So that's the first one we should discuss right off the jump right there, I think.
Yeah, and again, we should sort of understand that fallen angels have the ability to take a physical form to create an offspring, which is the typical creation process in polytheism. And that when we look at Buddha and Krishna, they are different beings, but the same chain of events of incarnation of Vishnu,
Yeah. Yeah. He's an
right?
incarnation. He's one of the avatars of Vishnu. Yep.
Yeah, so they're both avatars of the avatar Vishnu, yeah. And so, but there's a big spread between the time as well. So Buddha is,
Krishna is definitely an avatar of Vishnu. I know that. Yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, the eighth avatar, and I think Buddha is the 12th avatar.
Oh, wow.
And Krishna comes about 3,000 years before Jesus comes.
And
And
the name
Buddha
is
is
undeniable. I mean, Krishna and Christ is very similar.
it is. Most people will say there's no etymological link there. And I would suggest there is a connection.
Gotta be.
So, and as we look at Christ, that's sort of a Greek term for Messiah or Messiah, right? As the anointed one. And so the word Christ or Christos, as it's known in Greek, would be that word. And that means anointed one, and to rub, as in an anointing, right? And that goes back to Proto-Indo-Aryan, the same language as Sanskrit, to the Pi word gur or kur. It could be pronounced either way, as in Sumerian, it has a similar consonants that can be do with a K or a G. And it is an Indo-Aryan word that would mean dark, or black. Now, when we look at Krishna as that meaning, you have a meaning that means dark or black as well, and a similar word. And it actually goes back to um, uh, a very, very similar um, word association in Indo-Aryan, Kers, meaning dark or dirty. uh, right? And typically that's understood in terms of a black hair versus a black skin, but it could be both. But typically, and particularly in the Sumerian, it's more for black-haired individuals. So you have that connection there. That is a word that goes back to the beginning of the languages after the flood. That has a connection, and so if you're going to be an incarnation of Vishnu, you're going to be an anointed one. You are going to do all sorts of anointings that
Yeah.
involve the rubbing of oils on you, whether it's monotheist way of doing it or a polytheist way of doing it.
Yep. Yep. He's going to be treated like, yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
what happens is Krishna is, as is Buddha, is sharing their soul and body with Vishnu, and Vishnu is adding um, knowledge and power to those individuals as an incarnation. Now, it's a little bit different with Krishna, where Krishna is thought to be a virgin in that mythos or that scriptural writing in some of the versions. So it's not really explained how that is done, but again, it's that 3,000 year spread between the two.
Yeah.
That's unique. But what we do know is Hare Krishna is also related into that whole thing, and it's basically saying it's an incarnation of Vishnu. And an incarnation is something different than creating an offspring. And so an incarnation is that symbiotic avatar-avatar relationship. And the creation of Jesus is a little bit different. So that when the Holy Spirit goes upon Jesus, you have the beginnings of the soul and the body of the physical world being grown within Mary, and then the Word becomes flesh within that, who's already a spirit. So
Yeah.
comes in the same way, but there's not two spirits there,
Yeah,
and
that's interesting. I
that's
wanted
the
to
significant difference.
I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to bring up that part because there is similarities because I had, the incarnation of Buddha is recorded to have been brought about by a descent of a divine power or a Holy Ghost upon the Virgin Maya,
Yeah,
right? And then you have the incarnation of Jesus was, by a divine power or Holy Ghost on the Virgin Mary. And then when the Buddha descends from like a region of souls or whatever to enter into the body of the Virgin Maya, her womb assumes the appearance of some sort of clear, transparent crystal in which Buddha appears and be beautiful as a flower.
yeah,
And then when the heavenly seat enters the body of the Virgin Mary, her womb assumes a clear, transparent crystal type thing where Jesus is like a flower. So let's discuss that.
yeah.
You know?
Well, yeah, and one other thing to sort of keep in mind is that Antichrist will be an incarnation as well.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
And as the Christ consciousness or the Christos consciousness or the Krishna consciousness as you do all of that understanding, and that Antichrist actually receives a mortal head wound as well. So he's partly human and also partly um, uh, uh, not immortal, but has a mortal spirit working with him. So an incarnation of one or two more beings that are in there, and that uh, we need to look at the second coming of Jesus from a monotheist perspective is not an incarnation, either in the first or the second, because there's only the one spirit, and he's coming back in the same body that he left with, which again is different because you're going to have an incarnation as the new Buddha, Lord Mitra, an incarnation of Mitra or Vishnu or however you want to call that God that's going to be the avatar, is going to be providing the power to Antichrist as we understand it biblically. And as we understand that from a new age, this is the same process of this long line of beings that were sent to humankind to lead humankind into godhood. And in that, they also place Jesus, but not as the Word of God or the Son of God, but just one of many who came along. So they're not going to deny Jesus. They're going to just put him back into that chain of people sent. And then they're going to probably say that Antichrist, who comes before Jesus does, is the true one. And he's actually counterfeiting everything that Jesus will do to deceive people that he's the one. And he just comes first.
I wonder if the one that's going to receive the mortal hand wound is the Messiah ben Yosef, because the Jews they have the two, and the
Yeah.
Messiah ben Yosef is supposed to die in battle before the Ben David comes in.
Yeah, it's certainly from an allegorical sense, yeah, as that type of individual. So, and even in the Quran, you have two Mahdis that are coming, right? And one gets killed in that showdown within Islam. So there is these showdowns that are likely going to happen, and from a Judaic perspective you cannot avoid overlaying whether or not that is an accurate prophecy or not. That's not the point. My point is you have to, from a Judaic perspective, include the physical genealogy back to Judah and back to King David for them to believe that that's going to be their Messiah. So
Yeah.
whoever comes that deceives them, or whoever they believe is going to be the one and the one that's going to be killed, there has to be Judaic genealogical connections there. Otherwise, they'll just throw it out. And, that,
Correct me
and
for because was real bloodlines. Mary and Joseph, they weren't they were commoners, right? Carpenter, right? My my
you were
connection
breaking
is
up there.
unstable again.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Did you hear my question?
No.
All right. So, it was clear that Krishna and Buddha were born of royal bloodlines,
Yes.
but Jesus, Mary, and Joseph were his parents. They were carpenters and average people, no, right? They weren't considered
Correct.
royal.
But but both Joseph and Mary, and one from a legal being from the matriarch in this, from the patriarch in this sense, for the legality and inheritance rights. Both Joseph and Mary take, and they're posted in the New Testament. There's two separate genealogies. Both go back to David. One's a genealogy of
Wow.
Mary, one's a genealogy of Joseph, and so of royal Israelite
So they
blood. So
are. So they are royal.
they are royal,
Yeah.
except that in the Judaic belief system, the royals aren't created from giants as the bloodline, right? So that they have their genealogy that goes back to Abraham, back to um, Noah, back to Adam, as opposed to a patriarchal genealogy coming from a Nephilim, Rephaim, and a fallen angel.
It was, I figured just not common. They were, of course, chosen because of their bloodline. But it's it's interesting that Jesus, his parents were just regular people living as carpenters. They weren't being worshipped.
Yes, they weren't didn't have a seat on the Pharisees or the Sadducees or the Essenic seats for the Sanhedrin. They weren't officially part of the royal bloodline in terms of the close nobility, and you could even argue and make an accurate argument that the Herodian kingship in place there has nothing to do with Israel. It's actually Edomite,
Yeah.
and that was placed on, 100 or 200 years before the birth of Jesus, as that transitions from Rome, from the Maccabees and into the Herodian bloodlines to rule there for the rising empire of Rome. So yeah, they were sort of in almost in the lower two classes from a carpenter perspective, right? As
Yeah.
Joseph was a carpenter. But still he has those genealogies, and in the Bible they make that quite clear that has to be a direct genealogy back to David and then back to Adam.
Yeah, I noticed too that the earlier depictions of Jesus weren't necessarily the same as the later ones. The earlier ones, he didn't have like a beard in a lot of them, and
Yeah.
some of them he wasn't even crucified.
Well, and as a Judean at that time, you wouldn't make any images of Jesus for two
Yeah.
reasons. One is you wouldn't want to be deemed as worshiping a false prophet, as a lot of people, as Judea said he wasn't their Messiah. And the other thing is, even if he was, you wouldn't be permitted to create an image of him. So either way, we're not going to get an accurate description. And the only thing we get sort of biblically was there was nothing sort of to define him as being noble by his appearance or anything like that. So very plain as we would understand that. Now, would he have a long beard? Probably. Would he, if he had done a Nazarite type ascetic diet? Probably. If we look in that sort of understanding of the Samson Nazarites as opposed to being from Nazareth, um, that's plausible, um, because of who he was. Um, and that to me that would make some sense, but we really don't know what he would have looked like. So I always try and not get too caught up in that because we
Yeah,
just don't know, right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, people argue all over the world about what his skin color is and all of that. So
Yeah.
yeah,
What 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 I find so amazing about and mysterious about the Jesus story is two things that run in a parallel and connecting track. One is that there's a large missing period of his childhood, and that there are accounts of Jesus in India, in North America at that time that sort of come down. I think they've been um, changed to the polytheist biases as they come down, but we do
yeah,
get and the question would be is why would they have those accountings and why would we have this sort of gap? So one of the things we want to understand about Jesus is that Herod is wanting to kill Jesus as it's born, right, from a child. And that Joseph and Mary have to escape to Egypt until that first Herod is killed, and another Herod, genealogical offspring, takes his place afterwards, and then they come back, and then we see of him teaching when he's young in the temple, and that the Pharisees and the Sadducees, priests that are there, they're absolutely amazed at his teaching and his questions. And so if we now sort of factor in that he disappears as he grows older, and as you get into the next chapter, that's in Luke 2, Luke 3 is the next chapter, when he comes back in the 15th year of Tiberius. So there's a gap here from when he's born, and that reign would have been for the 15th year somewhere between 27 and 30 AD, as we would understand that. That he was doing miracles because that's and he's still developing in the body, and he's fully developed when he comes back physically and with wisdom in the accounting when he comes back in the 15th year of Tiberius. So we have accounts in the Quran that he does even more he does more miracles than what's are put in the Bible. So, and when he's specifically a child. So two things is if they wanted him killed so that he couldn't be born into it and survive into the world, that would continue throughout. And then we see the Pharisees and the Sadducees' reaction to Jesus when he is an adult and is challenging their hegemony, and they want to kill him. So, and before he's ready. And so the thought process for me here is if you want to protect him, you would do the same thing so he doesn't put himself into these places of risk, into another country, just as they did when he was a child. So you could have a gap there, which you do, and that he could have traveled to other countries and left an imprint on history somehow, some way into the places that he visited.
yeah. And you know that's interesting. Parallel with Krishna is the ruler of the country where Krishna was born. When they were informed that Krishna was born, they wanted to destroy all the males that night that were born that night.
Yeah. And here's what's really spooky about this when we look about things about um, nothing is new under the sun. Krishna is 3,000 years before Jesus. That's antediluvian. And I'm not sure what that means, but the end time is going to be like the days of Noah. So there could have been almost a complete similar sort of cycle to what's going on um, before the flood as there was been since the flood and what will happen in the end time. And again, you're freezing up again, by the way.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can now. Yep.
Yeah, you're frozen too. There you go.
Wow, crazy.
One of my I used to be a kickboxer, do Muay Thai, so one of my favorite boxing event. I my kickboxing to talk about Jesus, Gary,
Yeah.
today. We better stay good.
Well, I wonder, just as just sort of tongue in cheek, but a lot of times when you get into a lot of sensitive topics on the internet, these things happen in terms of
Yeah, and we
bad
usually have a good
connections. Yeah.
connection too. So
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
this is interesting. Yeah, and well, I was trying to find. I was going to start the show off with this, but we kind of got sidetracked and went down the birth. But I was looking for parallels with the whole. I've always been fascinated since I'm a boy with the darkness at the crucifixion. This divine person,
Yeah.
Jesus dies, and the
Yeah.
whole earth is shaking, and all this stuff is going on.
Yeah.
And it's in Luke, right? Luke, where he basically informs us that when the time of death of Christ, that the sun darkened, there was
Hmm.
darkness all over the earth, from what was it, the sixth and the ninth hour
Yep.
to the sixth and until the ninth hour, and the veil of the temple was rent in the
Yep.
midst, and all of this, right? And in Matthew, I think they go and talk about. I think it's in Matthew when they talk about the graves being opened
Yep.
and people appearing in the holy city, right?
Yep. Hmm.
Well, I was looking into this and I found some parallels in the Krishna, and even did
It froze up.
you know? Am I back?
Yeah, you're back again. Yep.
Oh wow, Jesus, this is incredible. Uh, so did you know that when Prometheus was crucified on Mount Caucasus, all of the frame of nature was being convulsed, and the earth quaked, thunder roared, lightning flashed, and the winds were going crazy, and the dissolution of the universe seemed to be threatened, right? And then when Krishna died, there was the sun darkened at noon, and sky rained fire with ashes and flames burned, and at sunrise and sunset thousands of figures were seen skirmishing in the air, and spirits were seen on all sides. So I found
Yeah.
that very interesting.
Yeah. And again, the age of that suggests that there was some sort of showdown before and an angelic war. So, and some people will take Shiva even back further than 3,000 years. So, I mean, not Shiva, Krishna back more than 3,000 years. I'm not enough of an expert on that history to distinguish why some would take it back about 3,000 years and some even further. Um, but what I do know is it's the Vedas are much older than what the seculars say, way older, and using not good science, probably political science on that versus actual science or junk
For
science.
sure. For sure. I think if you
So
if you ask them, they'll tell you like the 1100s.
yeah. So what here's the thing that you can't do. You can do a darkening of the sky with an eclipse. You can't do that for 3 hours with an eclipse
That's what I'm
unless
saying. It
you're,
wasn't an eclipse. Yeah.
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 So when there's a sign for Jesus, it's outside the laws of nature because they're above the laws of nature. You can have storms and everything else from the angels or the gods that control the weather, um, in the belief system that like a god of thunder, right? So just to make one sort of quick example. So, but just as you can't have a star hovering over Bethlehem for the period that it was as a sign where Jesus was going to be born, or the 3 days of darkness that's in the Exodus. A sign from God versus a sign from a lower advance being like the fallen angels or the gods from a monotheist perspective. God signs are outside the laws of nature. What happens within polytheism is within the model and the laws of nature.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have in my notes to bring up if we brought it up. This is a guy from the 1800s, Reverend Dr. Geikie. He quoted that about, and he's one of the most orthodox writers. He says that it's Impossible to explain the origin of the darkness. The Passover moon was then at the full, so that it could not have been an eclipse.
Yeah.
The early fathers were relying on a notice of an eclipse that seemed to coincide in time, though it really did not, fancied that the darkness was caused by it, but incorrectly.
Yeah. And it would be nice to be able to do that, but I mean, you can do the celestial procession models backwards to establish whether or not there would have been an eclipse at that point in time or not. Interesting. But again, if you look at that macro thing that we were sort of talking about at the beginning that we see reproduced on the earth is that, and it doesn't matter which side you're looking on it, because we both look at it from the same sort of understanding, whether you're a polytheist that says the monotheists counter everything within polytheism, or as a monotheist, we say they try and copy everything about God and what he has said about the world and what will happen. So it doesn't matter which way you get there in either belief system is they're both modeling the same things, right? And that's why you have to sort of dig into more of the information and the details to discern for yourself is which one is correct. And if you decide none are correct, you still made a decision. You didn't understand you made a decision. And it won't matter for you because you're just lost if you don't want to make a decision. So what I encourage people to do is to try and figure it out for themselves. What is the most plausible? What is the most consistent aspect in the supernatural nature of what we're talking about versus the dumbed down, brainwashed, secular point of view that'll get you nowhere to understanding anything. You can't hear you.
There it goes. I couldn't hear you either for a minute. What the hell's going on?
Like I say, we're not supposed to be talking about this, I
Yeah, we're not
guess.
supposed to. We're pissing people off. And people are in the chat room are saying it's a
I can't hear you again.
what is going on?
Now you're back.
I did avoid it. I did it. It's like somebody's controlling my computer right now.
I know.
I did avoid it for a while because I didn't want to offend people and I didn't want to
Yeah.
offend you.
Yeah.
But it's unavoidable. And I always found the darkness at the crucifixion one of my favorite
Yeah.
parts of it because
Yeah.
that was like it really showed me like this is not someone that's a regular.
Yeah.
This is someone divine.
Yeah. And we should understand as Christians that there will be accounts kept from ancient history, forged or otherwise, that are going to be designed to bring everybody back into polytheism from their belief system and or to wedge faith issues with the monotheists. It's been prepared for a long period of time, and we should also understand that there will be multiple antichrists coming.
Yeah, I mean the
And
Etruscan. Yeah,
and likely to feed on each of the various belief systems that are out there, polytheist or monotheist, until things get so bad and the one who's going to deceive everybody is coming back that sort of satisfies what everybody wanted to have happen, so to speak.
well, that's what I feel the 2025 is going to introduce to us
Yeah,
because that externalization of the celestial hierarchy that we talked
yeah,
about, that Theosophist and Alice Bailey talked about, and it coincides also with the Kali Yuga cycle that's ending.
yeah,
I truly think that's going to be an Antichrist type figure appearing.
yeah.
And isn't it interesting that Trump comes into office in 2025
Yeah,
again?
yeah,
And
interesting. Yeah. And what's also interesting in that Alice Bailey accounts is that Jesus is slotted in as one of those one sent on the way
yeah, yeah.
and different from the one that is coming.
Yeah. Yeah, she's all about the return of Christ as well, but it's the Christ consciousness
Yes.
that's returning.
And the other big thing about her allegory is it's the externalization of the hierarchy.
Yes.
Or those visible ones are going to be visible,
Yeah,
invisible
which
are going to make themselves
yeah,
visible.
yeah, which is by saying that it's basically telling you that something that has been invisible for a long time will now
Yeah,
be revealing itself,
yes.
and it's a hierarchy that's been presiding over us.
Yeah. And so what I would also say in terms of what you're saying to Trump is that and I like a lot of things that
Well,
President
I
Trump
I
does.
voted for him, but I'm not
Yeah.
saying that it wasn't the lesser of the two evils, but
And for me, yeah, it was the lesser, what we thought was the lesser of two
what I
evils, and
thought,
likely is,
yes.
yeah. And I thought with him coming to power, it would slow the New World Order movement and the end time down, that he would shut down a lot of the globalist organizations, but he seems to be acting more like a beast king
Yeah.
and a
Oh, he's been
beast
on a tear.
empire on a tear, and he seems to be speeding the geopolitical nature up to get the 10 kings and the 10 empires, whether it's, and I've always thought it would be an economic and military alliance of these 10 separate empires for the end time.
And Gary,
But he's
we
taken,
weren't even a month in and he was making radical changes.
yeah, yeah. So he's moving fast, and he's taking a wrecking ball to things that are going to change how that geopolitical nature is going to be set up. Because there's a difference between being a strong negotiator than doing things that you can't repair. And so, and I'll give as a Canadian, and again, understand that that's a biases, but as a Canadian, if he ever thinks that he's going to have now, based on what he said and done, Canada as part of that economic empire, Canada will never look at the US as a friend again.
Yeah.
He can limit the scar, but he can't eliminate the scar that he created. So friend no more.
Even the hockey game was tense the other night. The first
Yeah.
couple of minutes were fights.
Yeah.
USA and Canada.
And in Canada, we have been moving in the last month, and we have a political transition that's going on that makes it difficult right now. But we are moving for an economic war footing, followed by the things to put in not an economic war, but a military war footing. It will no longer be a undefended border. So it'll be more than border guards. It will be a fully defended border. And that we know we can't win, but it'll be messy, really messy, and you never put this back. And why it gets even more messy is that Canada's head of government is not the Prime Minister. It's the King of England, represented by the Governor General. So now you're going to bring England in. And if you're going to seize Canada, you're going to bring the French in because of Quebec.
Yeah. How do you feel
So
about
it
the guy
gets
from
really messy.
yeah, no, it's a mess. How do you feel about the guy from Canada that was he was the prime minister that they think he was the son of Castro?
Oh, that's Justin Trudeau.
Yeah.
Well, he certainly has the black hair. I don't know whether or not.
My wife was showing me pictures the other day. He does look very similar in
Yeah.
some of those pictures. I mean,
So, and it's very, I mean, they were, I mean, tremendous friends. And Margaret Trudeau, she's a bit of a
yeah.
rogue
Yeah, I get it.
individual, let's put it that way. But here's the interesting thing is that her, her name is Sinclair,
Oh,
and
wow.
she's from the Sinclairs of Scotland.
Wow. That's
And
very
Trudeau
significant.
was one of the first families of France coming over.
Wow. Some people were trying to say that Castro was Middle Eastern
Yeah.
and he's from the Pope bloodline, De Castro.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, there's no connection there. That's
Yeah,
just
no,
a
there isn't.
yeah.
Another interesting connection with the Trudeaus, both Pierre and Justin were personal friends with the Aga Khan of mystical mu Muslim sects. And so he's not Catholic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and of course Justin just went to the funeral of the Aga Khan, and he was spending Christmases there,
Wow.
just as his father was always spending time there. There is an unexplained family connection to the Aga Khans
Wow.
that is yet to be sort of revealed. So again, if you want to know who really runs this world, you, you got to understand the genealogies.
Yeah. It's incredible when you're it's incredible. And it starts to show that when a lot of people thought we were crazy talking about all this stuff, I mean, it
Yeah,
makes you think again. I mean, it's all about how we present it. If you present it in a certain way where people make you think, that's why we're doing these shows and we're getting better and better as we present them, because you got to take notice.
yeah,
People are starting to realize now, that we are being controlled and given a narrative, and it's being played out in front of us.
yeah. But my advice for President Trump, if he thinks he's doing things as a mission on God, I have to tell you that, you know, it's one thing to try and have peace through strength, but you don't get peace through war.
That's true.
You don't get truth through lies. I
That's
mean,
true.
those things just don't work, and that change your approach.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I never thought it would work out that a shrewd businessman would run a country. That's not who you want running the country. And I know just from personal people that I know that used, like, there's someone in my family that his friend ran a law firm, and Trump used their law firm
Yeah,
and ran up a bill for over a year, over $1 million, and then just said, I'm not going to pay you out. Take me to court. The guy
yeah,
couldn't afford to take him to court. He had to shut down his
yeah,
law firm.
yeah.
I mean, how is that a stand-up guy that's supposed to run your country?
Yeah, just because you are more powerful doesn't
Yeah,
give you the high ground.
yeah,
So,
yeah. So if you're doing
so
deals like that, just to
yeah,
the average working man and stuff too, I mean, that's
yeah. And again, I want to say for the record, I mean, I like a lot of the things that he's doing, but he's going to turn the whole world against him. And as powerful as the US is, you don't win that war economically or militarily. And that if the whole world says you're isolated as a trading place, fine, make everything yourself, sell everything yourself, but you are isolated.
yeah.
The US still is an export nation. If you take that away, you're going to have a significant problem. So
I
you
always
still
thought, like,
have to
why couldn't,
trade.
yeah, I always thought that why couldn't, like, Canada, USA, and Mexico sort of unite, and between the three of us,
Yeah.
we can plant everything we need, we can create everything we need.
I always thought that that would happen, but more through a wanting of doing that,
Yeah,
right? And that it would be more of a strong military alliance and economic bond, but not oppression.
yeah, yeah. Between the three, we're all connected. We
Yeah.
can build all the materials we need. We have
Yeah.
all the climates we need to do
Yep.
everything.
Yeah. So why do it this way?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
because it's all about materialistic
Yeah.
crap.
And people underestimate Canadians just because we
Yeah,
tend to
that's true.
be polite. I mean, we're a warrior nation. I mean, we bled and significantly, and before the US got into both wars, Canada was there. The UK would be down if it wasn't for Canada. The UK owes us. They will come to our
That's
support,
true.
plus the Commonwealth if required.
I've always liked Canada. I've always liked
Well,
the respect of the people in Canada too.
and we like Americans, but Canada was formed with the permission of England so as to not permit the US to have all of North America.
Wow.
That's our DNA. And we want to be similar to Americans. We just don't want to be Americans. And we were born not to join as a nation, not to join the US.
Wow. That's interesting. Is it taught that? Is that like the climate of the people too?
Yes. it's like a 90% like
Wow.
this never gets forgiven. That's the
Wow.
problem. So the scar doesn't go away. You can
It's like
just limit the
it's
damage.
embedded in the climate of the people.
Yeah, and when I was growing up, it was like we can never get into bed with the Americans because we know what they'll do.
Wow.
And in my generation, we said, well, maybe we can work this out. And but I can tell you, the parents of my generation never go there. Was never go there.
Wow. Yeah, I don't blame you. I mean, that seems to be the climate all over the world when it comes to America. They like the culture, they mimic the
Yeah,
culture,
yeah.
but they have no respect for the people or their dealings.
Well, I mean, and when you have power, you're going to be criticized more. And so there's always going to be criticisms, but you can avoid the major pitfalls. And I'm not saying like, that when I look at the free trade thing with US from other nations around the world, that they're all have duties in place, right? For US to export there. I look at that as fair, but we have a free trade agreement. There are no duties. And it's a free trade agreement that we negotiated with the Trump administration that you're going to violate. And you're just not using that as a wedge for the negotiation that's coming up, which we probably won't do with the US again. We'll go elsewhere with our resources and stuff. Um, but you negotiated it. And it's not just, you're not using it just for a negotiation. When you say you're going to make us a 51st state and you keep repeating it, that goes to the core of our raison d'etre. And I have to tell you if you're going to spend all of those resources on trying to enforce that, everything else goes to pot for you around the world. It's just a distraction you can't get into.
How is it with religion in Canada, in the schools? Do they talk about Christianity or anything like that in the schools? Because it's like forbidden here now.
Well, yes, so that same in Canada. So the in Canada, the left is a vassal of the US left. And so they impose uh, things that come down from the US. Everybody says Canada is more left than the US. That's not true. What is true is the left is more powerful in more locations in the left, acting as vassals of the US exported left.
I would say that sounds right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, they what about religion as a whole? Is it mostly Christian?
Well, it used to be, but our immigration laws over the last 3 or 4
Yeah.
decades has changed it. I think it's still a majority, but a very, very small majority.
Is there a big Jewish community in places like Hasidic
In
Jews?
Oh, Toronto, Montreal for sure.
They
Yep.
have their own communities.
Yep.
Yeah, we have that in New York. I don't know how it is in other states, but I know in New York there's whole communities of.
Yeah, you could look at Toronto as a mini New York in almost every sort of aspect.
Wow, I never been to Toronto.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not that familiar with Canada. Being there, I've went in on the bus once on it, but I never spent any time in Canada before.
So yeah, so it's
I've always liked the culture though. I'm a big hockey fan.
well, and we're also big football fans and baseball fans.
Yeah.
Um, so this is unfortunate. And I'm hoping you can put, things back into the box for a little bit more normality. And if that happens, it's just sort of generations that this will be a problem, not transgenerational
Yeah, it
in
seems
a
though that
longer
like the
extent. So
culture is opening up to Jesus lately more. Is that happening
not
in
in
Canada?
Canada yet. No,
It
the left,
seems to be happening
the
here.
the hegemony on the left hasn't been broken yet. It's starting to be more, coming apart in the US. Um, but I would also encourage people from the right or from the Christian perspective, as that comes back into balance, don't be like the left.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. It's just it's sad that religion becomes dangerous, that people die in the name of God every day.
Well, yeah, and religion has been used throughout our history to control people. And it's always the lower class, the third and fourth class that has all of the damage done to them.
Yeah.
So, not the upper classes.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I was going through the different the comparisons of the many different deities that they have, and
Yeah.
I the ones that stood out that I also feel like we couldn't deny was certain things that had to do with the Holy Ghost and things like that, but also um when Buddha, he did certain things that were like, he was visited by wise men as well.
Yeah.
A star appeared in the sky when he was
Hmm.
born and things like this, right? So many people would want to know, are these being absorbed, or are these things actually transpiring when divine beings are cut from a similar cloth?
Right. And my answer generally is on this is that those things for the most part likely happen.
Because even when Romulus, when Romulus died, they said that the sky darkened and everything happened, like similar to Jesus.
Yeah.
But the Romans believed that when
Yeah.
celestial signs happened, when kings
Yeah.
died or were born.
Yeah. But again, get into sort of the details of it. And so Romulus he's an Nephilim.
Yeah, he was born of a she-wolf. He was
Yeah. So
suckled by a she-wolf right when he was born.
yeah, and his patriarchal father is Ares, who isn't the top of the pantheon, or Mars, right? So it's in the details where you see subtle differences, and that could be just by different accounts as they've come down over time. But um, we should not, as I say, we should not be surprised as Christians that there will be similar accounts. Heck, even in the genealogies of Cain and Seth, you have same names, and most of the names have similar corresponding phonetically pronounced names in each of the lines. And again, so the Gnostics say that the genealogy of Seth is counterfeited to emulate their line. And of course, most Christians don't say that lineage in the Bible is counterfeited, but it's not the true line, right? Whereas the Cain line is raised up. So when we get into the analyzation of this, don't get shocked or disturbed when you see similarities, because everything is designed to make it uh, and you have to look at it again from whichever side you're on. The other side is going to try and make it more blurred for you to make it a more difficult sort of decision.
Yeah.
And that's that sort of testing that happens. But particularly as a Christian, understand that if you just totally say none of that happened, you could be out so far on a plank that your whole credibility might be cut off on the plank there. So um, we should not be looking to say all of that didn't happen. It probably did, but there are going to be differences.
Yeah. I mean, there's a place, do you ever hear of the place in Sri Lanka called Adam's Peak?
Yep.
Yeah, and that's Christians, Muslims. I mean,
Yeah.
all different people believe that's a holy spot for Adam, and I
Yeah.
think the Muslims might even believe that's where Adam first touched down on Adam's Peak. It's a spot in Sri Lanka. I mean, it's an island off of India, so it's very
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. And so then as you get into the different accounts around the world is there's different similar but different types of creations for Adam. It's that way all the way through. And again, we ought not to be surprised about that. We should not be surprised that polytheism would have a first man.
Yeah, like Manu.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, and I mean, when it comes to Jesus being born, we are taught. I mean, I went to Catholic school, religion school once a week when I was younger. I went to public school, but my mom had me in a religious school where I had to go once a week and study up until I was confirmed. And we are taught that Jesus was born in a manger. But was he actually born in a cave?
Well, the language suggests stable.
Because if it's a cave, then it really lines up with Krishna and Mithra and all of these
Yeah.
other.
So you get these arguments that says it should be a cave, but scripturally we can't get there with the words that it would be in a cave.
So it would scripturally it does come out to some sort of manger.
Yeah. Well, you know, a manger is in the stable, right? So
Yeah,
a manger, yeah. So
yeah, some sort of stable.
yeah. So and that the but you know the dating is all mixed up, right? In terms of how we celebrate it in winter because all of the animals would be in the stables of that at that time, um, because that's the rainy season, but they're out in the field. So it's going to be September or October as you get into the details of John and all the stuff associated with it. So, um, yeah, I mean, I've looked at that. I can't get there, but the common story in polytheism with similar types of stories is a cave. So there's going to be all of this attempt to change that to a cave. So again, is there a significant difference? Not a lot, but it's a nuance that's different for a reason.
And when Jesus was born, Joseph was away at the time, right?
Well, Joseph, well, we don't get that scripturally. Joseph and Mary were, I mean, they went to Bethlehem together for uh, the census, and they try and get a room. And so when deduces, unless I've got it wrong here, when deduces Joseph is going to be there.
Oh, I thought that he had gone to the city to pay for his taxes or to visit somebody at the time.
I'd have to see a passage on that, but that doesn't mean there aren't other gospels out there that might suggest that.
Yeah, I wrote that in my notes. Where did I write? Oh, I got it from yeah, it wasn't from the I got it from a book that was on Oriental religions and ancient faiths
Yeah,
that they mentioned that. This just was a similarity between because Krishna was born when his foster father, which is technically what Joseph is,
yeah,
right? Nanda was away from his home
yeah,
and he came into the city to pay his yearly tribute
yeah,
taxes to the
yeah.
king.
Yeah. So typically how people will open the door to that in that kind of approach, because it's a similar approach, is if a name isn't mentioned, in this case, Joseph, in a specific verse, they'll say, well, he wasn't there.
Yeah, because that's a very specific detail to align up. Like
Yeah,
when Krishna's foster father goes into the city to pay his taxes, all of a sudden he's born, and then that same story, that specific
yeah,
detail,
yeah,
that to me is like if that lines up, then what are we talking about here?
yeah. So again, I don't, I mean, I'll double check afterwards again, but I don't remember that as being part of it. But Joseph isn't the main character in this story. It's the birth of the baby that's going to be, and of course, the baby is in Mary. So, um, but there's nothing in there to suggest that I recall um, that Joseph wasn't there.
Yeah, I have to double check too. I have
Yeah.
to, yeah,
So I mean,
and
I don't know whether anybody in the chat has got something out that they can do that, but yeah, I've got to go through the four gospels to.
let me look real quick. Let me look if I could find it. Let me see. Let me see what pops up. Joseph and Mary traveled to Bethlehem to be registered for the tax that had been declared by Caesar Augustus, but which was not levied on the Jew. This taxation policy of the Romans explains why Jesus. I don't know. I don't think so. That's something different. I'd have to look it up later.
Yep.
But it did say that in one of the books that I had that he was away. Joseph was away. I think there's something about it, but I'll look into it more later. But that's a
Yep.
very interesting detail to line up if it is true.
Yeah.
You know?
It is, and I don't recall the detail. That doesn't mean it just I wasn't looking at it close enough, and that would have made because I wasn't familiar with that part with Krishna, so or Buddha, whichever reference that you were making
Yeah.
there.
No, it was
But
Krishna.
but again, it's like, when Pilate uh, learns that Jesus has died on the cross, and everybody's surprised because it wasn't that long a period of time that he died that early.
Yeah.
That's what the Gnostics used to say, well, he didn't die. That's what it's
Yeah.
really saying. And they took him down from the cross and healed him back to life. But that's not what scripture says. It just, but they'll seize on that, and they're experts at doing that. I mean, and the Gnostics are particularly good at knowing the Bible and its details in ways that Christians don't, and they seize on things that you might see faith issues with, and then that will justify their side of the story. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Krishna was crucified too. So that's very interesting.
yeah,
And then when he died at noon, I think the a black circle
yeah,
appeared over the sun and everything went dark and fire and ashes came down and all sorts of demons came out and things like that. So that's very interesting and very similar, very similar. And Krishna was also transfigured before his
yeah,
disciples.
yeah. And again, I always sort of go back to the Krishna thing and its extraordinary
Time period.
age.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is something that I can't find enough databases to substantiate that timing with that sort of happening. But I do know that everything works in the cycles according to the Bible. So, and it's going to be like the days of Noah. So we have no idea what was going on, in complete detail just before the flood because the details are too stingy on that biblically and even from accounts around the world.
Well, then here goes the question to this. Now, I'm not saying I believe this. I'm just
Yep.
putting this question. Could it be possible that Jesus was a new incarnation of Krishna?
Well, that's what the polytheists would say,
Yeah.
except that Jesus isn't listed amongst the incarnations of Vishnu.
Yeah, well, this would have to be a prophetic coming of a new one.
Yeah, because well, but if it's the same as Krishna or Buddha, that's Vishnu.
No, what I'm saying is that those scriptures were written way before of things that already happened,
Yes, but
right?
you would think that they would have another
Prof
incarnation in their writings of
Yeah.
somebody in another country.
Yeah. Well, that's
Or
true.
and
Yeah.
or maybe there was and they took it out. I mean, if we get into the speculation
Yeah.
side. So but
Krishna
what
is supposed to come again,
yeah,
and he's supposed to come again in Earth in later days, and he's
yeah,
supposed to appear among mortals as an armed warrior.
as an armed warrior, yeah,
Yeah.
just as Antichrist was. And he's like Buddha, right?
Yep.
It's the same thing. And of course, Buddha's after the flood and Krishna is before the flood.
Yeah. Wow.
And
Yeah.
who is the Antichrist figure before the flood? There had to be an Antichrist figure. Could be an Atlas, it could be Orion using Greek, but there would have been,
Prometheus.
what's that?
Prometheus.
Yeah, yeah. Who would it be before the flood? Because if it's the same, and the only difference is that God permits the flood to come
Yeah.
versus the destruction by fire, which is reserved for the end time, then there should be an Antichrist type figure, just as, Orion is depicted as that hunter warrior in the sky that is so important to polytheism. So again, I make a connection between Atlas, Orion, those types of gods using Greek mythology, that we can actually have some data points that, kind of come together, that that is too much of a coincidence.
Yeah.
And that's where Azazel is said to be hung in polytheism as well.
Yeah. Well, could King Og even be considered like an antichrist type figure? I mean, he ruled over who knows how many countless tribes.
Yeah. Well, he had like 60 cities
Wow.
and, 12 Pentapolis city fortresses just in the Mount Hermon region. Yeah, he could have been an Antichrist-like figure. Sure, why
Yeah.
not?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's what I look at him as more like an antichrist type figure, people like that. And then coming down into our days, I mean, it could
yeah,
be someone
yeah.
very similar to Trump, if not Trump, that's
Well,
right
and
like
and
that.
then you get the whether it's accurate or not, the conflation of a Gag, an Og, an Aga Khan, and the Mongolians, uh, Khans taking their bloodlines supposedly back through the Scythians back to King Og.
Yeah. Well, the Genghis Khan for sure. Yeah, Genghis Khan for sure was some type of antichrist figure. I
Yeah.
mean,
And I think we get these Antichrist figures coming along all the time. Um, but and even through empires that could be rising to a world empire, and certainly Genghis Khan would be almost like a beast-like empire in size, not listed in the prophetic nature, but um, they want to get control of the world. That's what they're there to do. And the Antichrist spirit has been with us all the way through, according to the New Testament.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's incredible. It's incredible when you start to go into all the different incarnations and avatars and even what the Jews believe. And Gary, I
Yeah.
really appreciate the time coming on to speak about this. Is a very sensitive
Yeah,
topic.
it is. And one last thing for the Christians, and I know I've spoken about this on this show and lots of other shows, is we know Satan can incarnate into people. And we get that biblically as one quick example where Satan incarnates into Judas to give him the courage to betray Jesus. And he becomes the first son of perdition.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, everybody, the great Gary Wayne, Genesis6conspiracy.com. Not many Christians have the courage to talk about this topic in the way he does, everybody. Really respect this man. Thank you, Gary, for joining us. Everybody, pick up his series of books, Genesis 1 and 2, Genesis 6 Conspiracy 1 and 2. You guys can get signed copies as well. Gary, you got anything coming up?
No, just doing shows and staying busy.
No one pumps out podcasts like Gary Wayne, everybody. You guys, we have been sponsored by the mysticalspiralstore.com. This is the Space Water Podcast. My name is Ra Castaldo, and we are broadcasting right here from the lower Hudson River of New York. And our guest today is once again Gary Wayne from Genesis6conspiracy.com. Thank you all. Have a good weekend and